Right now, somewhere in a factory in Maranello, engineers are staring at a wall of data trying to explain how a car fast enough to win races keeps ending up in the steward's room instead of on the podium. And once you see the full picture, you'll understand exactly why Mercedes is celebrating quietly while Ferrari is left explaining itself to the FIA yet again. If this is your first time here, welcome. And if you've been here before, you know the drill. Hit subscribe, tap that bell, because we're about to go deep into a story that has been building race after race. Let's break it down. To understand how big this moment is, ask yourself one question. How does a team with genuine championship pace keep losing ground not to their rivals on track, but to their own mistakes off it? That is exactly what has been happening to Ferrari all year, and it didn't start with one incident. It built layer by layer, race after race, until even Ferrari's own leadership could no longer pretend it wasn't a pattern. When a car capable of fighting at the front brings a new headline about fines or penalties every single weekend, at what point do you stop calling it bad luck and start calling it a crisis of execution? Let's start with the kind of story that sounds small on paper, but says everything about a team behind closed doors. During a routine procedural check at the Belgian Grand Prix weekend, Ferrari was found to have failed to physically return 2 sets of tires to Pirelli after electronically logging them as returned. Sounds bureaucratic, almost too minor to matter, right? But here's the twist. The FIA's own technical delegate had to flag it before Ferrari even noticed themselves. 2 counts, €5,000 each, 10,000 total. If one of the most resourced teams on the grid can't get something this basic right, what does that tell you about the pressure building inside that garage? In Formula One, small mistakes are rarely isolated. They're symptoms. And just when you thought that was the end of it, the real gut punch arrived. At that same stretch of races, Ferrari found itself at the center of a far more serious incident, an unsafe pit release involving Lewis Hamilton, where a mechanic was struck by the car's front right tire as it was released from the box. Hamilton has already served a 5-second penalty from a first-lap incident. He pits again. The crew works fast, under pressure. Then, in that split-second chaos, someone steps into the path of a moving F1 car. He goes down. Thankfully, he's not seriously hurt, but the stewards don't let it slide. A €30,000 fine follows, 10,000 suspended for 12 months on condition Ferrari tightens its protocols. Here's the question that should keep people up at night in that garage. If your pit crew can't execute cleanly under pressure, how are you supposed to win a championship decided by fractions of a second? But we haven't even gotten to the driver himself yet, and this is where the story gets hard to believe. Lewis Hamilton, a 7-time world champion who has survived every kind of pressure this sport can throw at him, found himself at the center of penalty after penalty this season, and not because he suddenly forgot how to drive. At the British Grand Prix, he was hit with a 5-second penalty for a false start, a call so marginal that Ferrari boss Fred Vasseur insisted the car had barely crept forward, just 2 millimeters, according to their own sensor data. And yet the penalty stood. The very next weekend in Belgium, Hamilton picked up another 5-second penalty for a first-lap collision with Mercedes' George Russell that sent Russell spinning out of the race, with Vasseur publicly calling it mega harsh. Then at the Hungarian Grand Prix, Hamilton was hit with a 3-place grid penalty for impeding Oscar Piastri in Q3, dropping him from second on the grid all the way to 5th. 3 race weekends in a row. 3 separate penalties. And here's the part that should stop you in your tracks. Ferrari's own boss admitted publicly that the Hungary penalty was the team's fault, not Hamilton's, because he was warned about Piastri far too late. When your own leadership keeps taking the blame race after race, that stops being an excuse. That becomes a confession. Now let's bring Charles Leclerc into this picture too, because his season has had its own share of nightmare weekends that fit perfectly into this larger story. At the Miami Grand Prix, Leclerc was locked in a genuine fight for the podium in the closing laps when he clipped the wall, damaging his car so severely it could barely turn to the right anymore. Somehow, incredibly, he kept the car moving, limping it home through the final laps. But because the damage forced him outside track limits repeatedly, the stewards handed him a brutal 20-second time penalty after the checkered flag. That single decision dropped him from 6th place all the way down to 8th, instantly promoting Hamilton and gifting a career-best finish to a rival further down the order. 20 seconds. In a sport where the difference between P1 and P5 is sometimes measured in single-digit seconds across an entire race distance, that is not a minor adjustment. That is a full reversal of fortune, decided entirely by decisions made under pressure in the final, most desperate moments of a Grand Prix. So now, here comes the real question, the one that flips this entire story on its head. While all of this was happening to Ferrari, race after race after race, what exactly was Mercedes doing? Because this is where the story of 2026 truly divides itself into two completely different narratives. On one side of the garage, chaos, fines, and penalties. On the other side, quiet, almost unremarkable consistency. And in Formula One, unremarkable consistency wins championships. By the time the season reached Canada, Mercedes had strung together 4 consecutive victories, and their young title contender had opened up a gap of 43 points over his own teammate at the top of the drivers' standings. Let that number sink in for a second. 43 points. Not over a rival team. Over his own teammate, in the same car, on the same team. That tells you everything about the level of dominance Mercedes has built while Ferrari has been busy putting out fires. And the brutal truth underneath all of it is this. Mercedes hasn't necessarily had the fastest car on every single circuit this season. What they've had is discipline. Clean starts, clean pit stops, clean racecraft. While Ferrari has been handing points back to the field through 5-second penalties and 20-second sanctions, Mercedes has simply been finishing races and banking the results. This is exactly why so many people inside the paddock are now openly asking a question that would have sounded ridiculous at the start of the season. Has Ferrari's championship campaign already been decided, not by pace, but by discipline? Because here's something worth sitting with for a moment. If you stripped away every single penalty Ferrari has picked up across this season, every fine, every grid drop, every time penalty, where would they actually sit in the championship battle right now? For a lot of analysts, the honest answer is uncomfortably close to the top, which means the car was never really the problem all along. The execution was. And that is a far scarier realization for Ferrari than simply admitting they don't have the pace, because a lack of pace can be engineered away with upgrades and development. A lack of composure under pressure is a much harder problem to fix, and it usually starts from the top down. Which brings us to the moment everyone in this story has been building toward. The moment a team boss finally had to step in front of the cameras and answer for all of it. Now, credit where it's due, Fred Vasseur has not hidden from any of this criticism. He has stood in press conference after press conference, absorbed every hard question, defended his drivers publicly while quietly admitting the team's own errors behind the scenes. He called the British Grand Prix penalty harsh. He called the Belgian Grand Prix penalty mega harsh. He openly admitted the team's own miscommunication cost Hamilton dearly in Hungary. And on the surface, that kind of accountability looks admirable. But here's the uncomfortable truth hiding just underneath it. You can only stand up and say, "We made a mistake," so many times before people stop hearing an explanation and start hearing a pattern. At what point does admitting fault after fault after fault stop being honesty and start being an admission that the entire operation needs to be rebuilt from the ground up? Now think about what this actually means going forward, because the psychological weight of this season is arguably more damaging to Ferrari than the points they've lost on paper. When a team is winning cleanly, every single decision gets easier. Strategists take calculated risks because they trust their execution. Drivers push harder because they trust their pit crew, and confidence compounds week after week into an unstoppable rhythm. But when a team is constantly firefighting penalties and investigations, the opposite happens. Every overtake gets second-guessed. Every pit call gets second-guessed. Every mechanic on that wall feels the weight of knowing one mistake could become the next headline. And that pressure doesn't just disappear, it compounds, race after race, until it becomes its own kind of gravity, pulling the team further and further away from the top of the standings. Add to that the fact that both Hamilton and Leclerc are already deep into their power unit component allocations for the season, meaning the margin for error from here on is smaller than ever. One more unnecessary incident could mean a grid penalty that costs them an entire race weekend, not just a handful of points. So where does all of this actually leave us heading into the final stretch of this season? Ferrari, a team with a car genuinely capable of winning races and fighting for a championship, watching Mercedes build what is quickly starting to look like an insurmountable lead. Not necessarily because Mercedes has been unbeatable on raw speed every single weekend, but because Mercedes has simply stopped beating themselves. And if there's one lesson this entire 2026 season has hammered home so far, it's this. In Formula One, speed alone has never been enough. Championships are won by whoever makes the fewest mistakes when the pressure is at its absolute highest. Ferrari clearly has the speed. What they are still searching for is the composure to actually use it when it matters most. Now, I genuinely want to know what you think, because this is exactly the kind of debate this sport thrives on. Do you believe this is a real execution crisis inside Ferrari? Or are the stewards simply holding them to a stricter standard than everyone else on the grid this season? Is Fred Vasseur the right leader to turn this around? Or does Ferrari need a completely different structure inside that garage to fix this for good? And most importantly, with the gap growing every single race weekend, can Ferrari realistically claw this back? Or has Mercedes already built a lead too big to catch? Drop your prediction down in the comments below. I read every single one of them, and I'll be pinning the best takes to the top of this video for everyone to see. If this breakdown helped you understand what's really been happening behind the scenes this season, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who love this sport as much as we do. And if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on, because this championship battle is only getting more intense from here, and I will be right here breaking down every single twist the moment it happens. Until then, I'll see you in the next one.